Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. George Santos, aka Anthony DeVolder, aka Anthony Zabrowski, aka the most hated man in Congress. George Santos was the man of 1,000 names and not a single shred of honesty. But at least now he can take the name the most hated man in Congress off of his resume because he's now the most hated man out of Congress. Expelled a few days ago under a humiliating cloud of scandal. What needs to be remembered, though, is that he was expelled for things that he allegedly did before he got to Congress. Typically, the way that it works is that people who are expelled from Congress, it's for things that they did while they were a member. So the expulsion of George Santos was a great departure from what they normally do. And it was his own Republican colleagues who led the charge to throw him out. But while he may be gone, he is determined not to be forgotten because now George Santos has vowed revenge. And he's going to tell all the malfeasance and accusations that he learned about during his time in Congress, and he's going to be aiming his guns at the people who threw him out of office. After all, if he had to go because of things he did before he was in Congress, then they should have to go for the things that they've done while in office. Now, what I find interesting is that this pathological liar is retaliating by telling the truth. Not about himself, of course, he would never do that, but about his former Republican colleagues who led the charge to throw him out. He's been on Twitter, tweeting up a storm saying that Congress members who spoke against him, like fellow New York Congressman Mike Lawler, has questionable campaign finance violations. He also made accusations against another of his accusers, New York Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, saying that she made questionable stock trades. He nicknamed her Mallio Stock Tips. He also hinted that perhaps she's LGBT like he is. He said that the difference between himself and her is that he doesn't live in denial about being gay. Now, what really makes Santos's veiled accusation interesting is that Malliotakis is married to a man. Now, the fact that he would say something like that is probably because of one of two reasons. One, this woman has taken some stances regarding the LGBT community that rankled his nerves, and he decided to do this as a way to kind of do something spiteful against her. Or perhaps he knows something about her that other people in Congress just haven't been talking about. Either way, that tweet about Malliotakis has already gotten almost 4 million views on Twitter, so people are seeing that. He accused another New York representative, Congressman Lalata, of not showing up for his taxpayer-funded job while he was going to school, and he inferred that this could constitute malfeasance. He posted a message accusing Congressman Brandon Williams of going on drunken tirades, and that his chambers reeked of alcohol. Santos also said Williams mistreated his staff and even went so far as to physically assault one of them, and threatened to end another staffer. He also threatened to refer everyone, except for Williams, interestingly enough, to the Ethics Committee. So the people who apparently have some hanky-panky with their stock tips and what have you, Santos says, I'm going to refer you guys to the Ethics Committee. But the guy who he accused of physically assaulting someone, well, he ain't got much to say about that. He'll just let the powers that be decide what to do about that. Nice to see that Santos's questionable moral compass is still pointing due southeast. So this is what George Santos is doing now that he's been booted out of Congress. He's attempting to do to his accusers what they did to him. Now, I for one actually consider it to be a good thing that at least somebody is saying something about the fact that members of Congress have the inside track, especially when it comes to legislation that's coming down the pike. Because legislation from Congress happens to be one of the main drivers of what happens on Wall Street. People are trying to figure out what's Congress going to do about this or that so that they can position themselves accordingly. And when you're the people who actually make the laws, you know before everyone else does. It's no secret that members of Congress come to D.C. poor and leave filthy rich. That's what happens when you have insider information. Personally, I think the members of Congress shouldn't be allowed to play the stock market at all. It's simply too dangerous. They have too much information. So regardless of his clearly selfish motives, George Santos is actually forwarding a conversation that is long, long overdue and necessary. Now, of course, there's something to be said about how Santos is the epitome of the immature, self-centered, millennial, online beefing culture. That's what he's also dipping his toes into the waters of. And that is true. And it certainly doesn't help that this man is known mostly for the fact that he's a pathological liar. But the reason that I thought him worthy of being mentioned to you in this morning's briefing is because he's actually airing the dirty laundry. It's his audacity that I actually think is worthy of merit. Now that he's out of Congress, he has no incentive to protect any of them, and he's not. Now, once you get past the jokes about Santos and the ridiculous nature of his one-term wonder, I think his would-be scorched earth policy is actually a good thing. And yeah, he knew all this information, he knew it from the day that he got into Congress, and he's only talking about it now because they subjected him to the supreme humiliation of being expelled from Congress. But his motives aside, I'm looking at whether or not what he's doing is worthwhile, and I think it is. They've already scheduled a date for the voters in his district to elect his replacement. It's going to be in February. Keep in mind, being expelled from Congress doesn't mean that he's barred for life. He can run for Congress again. That is, assuming he can find someone dumb enough to give him money, because that was one of the main reasons that he got booted out. And it also assumes that whoever is elected to replace him actually loses to him. That's a lot of ifs, especially in the political arena. That district is purple to begin with, in a Democratic state, so it's just as likely that the Democrats might regain that seat. And given Santos's behavior, he doesn't seem to have his heart set on getting back into the House of Representatives anytime soon. These days, he's more interested in barbecuing his former colleagues. Oh, and before anyone asks if black people should support him, the answer is no. Just because two sides are duking it out doesn't mean that one of them is right. As we've seen in so many other cases, all too often both sides are wrong. Sometimes there's no good guy to root for, and we as black people shouldn't be looking for one. Alright, so why is one of the most infamous liars in the history of Congress the subject of this morning's briefing? Because as much as a liar and a fraud and a joke as George Santos is, he's doing a better job of standing up for his constituents out of Congress than the congressional black talkers have done while in Congress. And it says a lot about how morally bankrupt the Congressional Black Caucus is that George Santos, of all people, has enough nerve to actually dish the dirt on people in Congress. Meanwhile, you got the Congressional Black Talkers who circle the wagons on cue for whomever tells them to do it. We all know people who try to make excuses for the CBC, that clown car of cowards. But their refusal to speak up for us is not some victimless crime. It's not just playing the game. What they do is a deadly betrayal. When other groups are getting legislation and policies for themselves, we're the ones who are left out, and they say nothing about it. They have not even one time declared that they are going to come together as a group and block legislation until they get the things that we need. After all, isn't that the entire purpose of having a caucus? Now, you take a look at the so-called Freedom Caucus, that's the main thing they do. Basically, they might as well call themselves the Obstruction Caucus because that's all they spend their time doing. The Congressional Black Caucus, on the other hand, which is far larger and allegedly far better positioned, they don't do anything. But then again, it's because you got these worthless Negroes like Benny Thompson and the rest of these failures, these civil rights retreads. They're getting theirs as far as they're concerned. That's all that really matters. See, Joe Biden's not the only Democrat who is not worthy of our support. He's not the only one who we would be better off if he wasn't in office. There's plenty of others who don't need to be in office, and plenty of others who were better off if they were back in the private sector. Anybody who cheerleads for a president who does not dare say reparations, and does not dare talk about a black hate crime law, and does not make it clear that this has to pass no matter what, they tell us that they're going to work to get Biden reelected? This is a group of traitors. There's plenty of black members of Congress who have remained silent after they left office. And I mean more than just airing the dirty laundry of their colleagues. So many of them want to parlay their career in Congress into lucrative positions working for the very corporations that they took campaign donations from. Even out of office, they're still playing the game. And that's the point of this morning's briefing. It says a lot when a worm like George Santos has more nerve and more guts than any of the spineless, worthless jellyfish in the Congressional Black Talkers. And while we're on the subject of government workers who have no guts, this also goes for the black police officers. Now, nobody's saying that they should be taken to the rooftops and proclaiming their disdain for the racist police and sheriff's departments they work for. That would be counterproductive. My problem is they're all loyal members of the Blue Wall. They do not tell us anything and they decide to play the game themselves. A lot of the dirt that goes on in these police departments, a lot of these black officers are complicit with it. Many of them are perpetrators of it, like the murder of Tyree Nichols. When Michael Slager murdered Walter Scott, shooting him in the back multiple times, the first person on the scene was a black police officer. Now, even then, it was obvious that Scott was handcuffed and had been shot in the back multiple times, and that Slager had just dropped a taser beside the corpse of the man that he murdered in cold blood. He was clearly creating a crime scene. But that black officer didn't do anything. So many Negroes want to seem important by trying to brag about how they got the inside scoop on this or that. but it's usually just empty boasting. As black people, we have to have zero tolerance for Negroes who work in the government and then do everything they can to protect the government while it's attacking us and depriving us of our rights and what it owes us. These people at the Congressional Black Caucus, working with the very forces who are working against us, keeping them safe, protecting their secrets, making sure that whatever dirt that they do remains confidential because they understand that's their real job. If a weasel like George Santos can find the nerve to call out his former colleagues, then the turncoat Negroes in government have absolutely no excuse. People can say what they want about Santos, mainly because it's true, but he's actually speaking up and speaking out. These silly Negroes in government and the ones out of government, they're not saying a word. So how much lower than George Santos does that make them? Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Sabrina, Amir Miller, Miss Debbie, Noel Williams, and Kareem Lawless. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.